Barcelona. The city of dreams, or so they say. I wasn't here for dreams, though. I was here to forget. The cab ride from the airport was a blur, the city lights flashing past as I tried to push the memory of Emily out of my mind. 5 years gone. Just like that. I needed something, anything, to fill the void she left. The hotel room was decent enough, but it wasn't like I cared. I threw my suitcase on the bed, then walked to the window. The city was alive, pulsing with energy I could almost taste. The night was young, and I had nowhere to be. Perfect. I hit the shower, letting the hot water pound against my skin, hoping it would wash away the lingering sadness. But it didn't. I wrapped a towel around my waist, stared at my reflection in the mirror. "Get it together, Alex," I muttered. The bar wasn't far, just a short walk through the narrow streets that twisted like a maze. Music thumped from inside, the kind of deep bass that made my chest vibrate. I could already feel the pull of the night, the promise of something or someone new. I stepped inside, the heat and noise hitting me all at once. Bodies moved together, some grinding to the beat, others leaning close, whispering secrets over drinks. I made my way to the bar, ordered a whiskey neat. The burn as I swallowed was sharp, just what I needed. I scanned the room, not really looking for anything, but not exactly not looking either. Then I saw him, tall, lean, with tousled golden brown hair that caught the light just right. Our eyes met, and for a moment the noise around us faded. I didn't know what I was doing, but something about him drew me in. Before I knew it, he was standing next to me. "You look like you could use some company," he said, his voice low, smooth. Maybe, I replied, trying to play it cool. But my pulse was racing, and not just from the alcohol. "Alex," I offered, extending my hand. He didn't just shake it, he held it, his grip firm and confident, his eyes never leaving mine. "Carlos," he said, his lips curling into a smile that was almost too perfect. "First night in the city." I nodded, trying to focus on something other than the way his touch made my skin tingle. "Yeah, just got here. Needed a change of scenery." Carlos leaned in a little closer, his breath warm against my ear. "Well, you picked the right place. Barcelona has a way of showing you what you didn't know you were looking for." The way he said it made my chest tighten. Was this just bar talk, or was there something more? I took another sip of my drink, the whiskey's heat doing little to calm the strange mix of excitement and nervousness churning inside me. Carlos motioned to the bartender for another round, and before I could protest, a fresh glass was placed in front of me. "To new experiences," he said, raising his glass. I clinked mine against his, unsure whether I was in control or just letting myself be pulled along by whatever this was. To new experiences. We talked, or at least we pretended to. I couldn't remember what we said 5 seconds after the words left our mouths. It was all just background noise to the real conversation happening between our eyes, our hands, the way he'd lean in just a bit too close, his leg brushing against mine under the bar. The night was slipping away faster than I could keep track. The crowd around us thinned as the hours wore on, but Carlos and I stayed glued to our seats, locked in this strange, intoxicating dance. "Want to get out of here?" His voice was low, just loud enough for me to hear, but there was no mistaking the intent behind it. I hesitated, my mind scrambling to find some reason to say no, but the words wouldn't come. All I could think about was how close he was, how every nerve in my body was telling me to say yes. "Yeah," I finally breathed, barely recognizing my own voice. Carlos didn't waste a second. He slid off his stool, his hand slipping into mine as if it was the most natural thing in the world. And somehow it felt like it was. The cool night air hit us as we stepped out of the bar, but it did nothing to cool the heat building between us. Carlos still had my hand and I didn't pull away. I didn't want to. The streets were quiet, the city's usual chaos muted at this hour. It felt like it was just the two of us, like the world had shrunk down to this moment. "Not far," Carlos murmured, his thumb brushing over my knuckles as he led me through the winding streets. His touch sent sparks up my arm, and I found myself tightening my grip, needing to feel connected to him. We turned a corner, and there was his building. Modern, sleek, the kind of place that looked like it belonged to someone who had their life together. As we entered, the lobby was empty, silent except for the echo of our footsteps. The elevator ride up was a blur, the tension between us thick, almost suffocating. When the doors opened, Carlos didn't hesitate. He he led me down a short hallway to his apartment, unlocking the door with a quick flick of his wrist. The moment we were inside, he was on me, his hands in my hair, his lips crashing against mine. I didn't think, didn't hesitate. I kissed him back with a hunger I didn't know I had. The taste of whiskey still lingered on our tongues, mixing with something raw, something primal. My hands roamed his body, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt, the warmth of his skin. This was new, uncharted territory, but it felt right. It felt inevitable. Carlos guided me toward the bedroom, our lips never parting, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. Clothes were shed along the way, leaving a trail behind us. By the time we reached the bed, there was nothing left between us but skin and the electric pull of whatever this was. He pushed me onto the bed, his body covering mine, and I gave in completely. His touch was sure, practiced, and it drove me wild. Every nerve in my body was on fire, and I couldn't get enough. My hands clutched at him, needing to feel every inch of him, to pull him closer, deeper. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only Carlos, only this moment, only the way he made me feel like I was coming undone and being remade all at once. I wasn't thinking about anything, my past, my doubts, my fears, they all dissolved in the intensity of what we were doing. Time lost meaning. It could have been minutes, it could have been hours, but when we finally collapsed beside each other, tangled in the sheets, our breaths slowly returned to normal, the haze of passion lifting just enough to let reality start creeping back in. Carlos lay beside me, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my chest. For a moment I let myself enjoy it, let myself believe that this was something I wanted, something I needed. But as the adrenaline ebbed away, doubts began to seep in. What had I just done? What did this mean? But I kept quiet, focusing on the sound of our breathing in sync, trying to hold on to the last remnants of the night before everything got complicated. The first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. I blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the night before came rushing back, and I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. Carlos was still asleep beside me, his arm draped lazily over my chest, his breathing deep and even. He looked peaceful, content even, but all I could feel was the rising tide of panic. What had I done? I carefully slid out from under his arm, trying not to wake him. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood, looking around for my clothes. They were scattered across the room, remnants of our frantic journey to the bed. I grabbed them quickly, pulling them on with shaking hands. My mind raced, the reality of the situation crashing down on me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't me. This wasn't what I was supposed to want. I wasn't gay, was I? The thought made my stomach churn, and I swallowed hard, trying to keep it together. Carlos stirred, mumbling something in his sleep, and I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. But he didn't wake, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I needed to get out of here, needed to put as much distance between us as possible before I lost my nerve. I found a scrap of paper on his nightstand and scribbled a note, my hand shaking so badly that the words were barely legible. Carlos, I'm sorry, but this was a mistake. I'm not gay. Last night shouldn't have happened. Alex. I stared at the note for a long moment, guilt gnawing at me. I knew this was a coward's way out, but I couldn't face him. I couldn't face what last night meant. I placed the note beside him, then turned and slipped out of the apartment, closing the door softly behind me. The pre-dawn streets were empty, the city still asleep as I made my way back to the hotel. My mind was a mess, thoughts tangled and chaotic. What did this mean for me? Was this just a one-time thing, a reaction to the heartbreak and the loneliness? Or was it something more? Something I wasn't ready to confront. As I reached the hotel, I vowed to put it all behind me, to forget it had ever happened. This was a mistake, a lapse in judgment, nothing more. But as I lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. The memory of Carlos's touch, his kiss, lingered in my mind, refusing to fade away. I closed my eyes, trying to push it all down, to bury it deep where it couldn't touch me. But even as I drifted off to a restless sleep, I knew it was too late. Something had changed, and there was no going back. 6 months passed in a blur. I threw myself into work, taking on every project, every late night, anything to keep my mind occupied. It worked, at least on the surface. I climbed the ranks quickly, eventually landing a position as creative director at one of the top marketing firms in a new city. A fresh start, exactly what I needed. Today was my first day. I straightened my tie in the reflection of the elevator doors, trying to calm the nerves that fluttered in my stomach. New city, new job, new Alex. The past was just that, the past. I was here to focus on my career, to prove myself. Whatever happened in Barcelona was a fluke, a mistake, and I'd left it behind. The elevator chimed, and the doors slid open to reveal the sleek, modern office space. Bright, airy, bustling with energy. My boss, a sharp-looking woman named Claire, was waiting to greet me. "Alex, welcome aboard," she said with a warm smile. "Let me show you around." I followed her through the maze of desks and offices, exchanging polite nods and handshakes with my new colleagues. The place had a good vibe, creative, fast-paced, just the kind of environment where I thrived. Claire was chatting about the upcoming projects, the clients we'd be working with, but I was only half listening, already planning how I'd make my mark here. We rounded a corner, and that's when I saw him. Carlos. Sitting at a desk, his head bent over a stack of papers. He looked up as we approached, and our eyes met. For a second, everything around me blurred, and all I could focus on was the shock in his eyes, mirroring my own. "Carlos, this is Alex, our new creative director," Claire said, completely oblivious to the storm brewing between us. "You two will be working closely together on the Thompson account." Carlos stood, extending his hand, his expression unreadable. I took it, the familiar jolt running through me as our hands connected. His grip was firm, professional, but there was a tension there, a current of something unresolved. "Nice to meet you," I mumbled, my voice strained, my mind reeling. Of all the places, all the companies, how did I end up here with him? "Likewise," Carlos replied, his tone smooth, but his eyes were searching mine, trying to gauge my reaction. Claire continued the introductions, completely unaware of the silent exchange between us. My thoughts were a chaotic mess, but I forced myself to focus, to keep up appearances. The day passed in a blur of meetings and orientations, but I couldn't shake the feeling of Carlos's presence, like a shadow that I couldn't outrun. By the time I finally left the office, my head was spinning. Seeing Carlos again had thrown me off balance in a way I hadn't anticipated. I'd convinced myself that I'd moved on, that Barcelona was behind me. But now, with him back in my life, all those buried feelings were clawing their way to the surface. I knew I couldn't avoid him. We'd be working together, and pretending that nothing had happened between us wasn't an option. But how could I face him, knowing what we'd shared, knowing that I'd run away? As I walked back to my apartment, the city lights flickering around me, I realized that this fresh start wasn't going to be as clean as I'd hoped. The past had a way of catching up with you, no matter how fast you ran. And now it was staring me in the face, daring me to confront it. The next morning I walked into the office with a plan: keep it professional, keep it distant. Whatever happened between Carlos and me in Barcelona was a mistake, one I wasn't about to repeat. I'd made it through the first day, and I could do it again. Just stay focused. But the moment I saw him, that plan went out the window. Carlos was already in the conference room when I arrived, reviewing the Thompson account files. He looked up as I entered, his expression neutral, but there was a flicker in his eyes, something that told me he hadn't forgotten either. "Morning," he said, his voice casual, like we were just colleagues, like nothing had ever happened between us. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile as I took a seat across from him. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with everything we weren't saying. We dove into the work, discussing strategies, brainstorming ideas, but it was all surface level. The real conversation was happening beneath the words, in the way our eyes met and then quickly darted away, in the pauses that hung just a little too long. After an hour, the door opened, and Claire stepped in, oblivious to the undercurrent in the room. "How's it going in here?" she asked, glancing between us with a smile. "Good," Carlos said smoothly, flipping a page in the file. "We're just getting started." "Great. I knew you two would make a strong team," she said, completely unaware of the irony. "Keep me updated." As soon as she left, the silence between us grew heavier. I could feel Carlos watching me, waiting for me to say something, but I couldn't bring myself to address the elephant in the room. Instead, I focused on the files in front of me, pretending to be absorbed in the numbers. Finally, Carlos broke the silence. "We need to talk, Alex." I froze, my hand tightening around the pen I was holding. I knew this was coming, but I wasn't ready. I looked up at him, trying to keep my expression neutral. About what? He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. About Barcelona. About what happened between us. I felt a surge of panic, but I pushed it down. It was a mistake, I said quickly, too quickly. We were both in a weird place, and things got out of hand. Carlos didn't flinch, didn't break eye contact. Maybe. But that doesn't change the fact that it happened. And now we're here, working together. We can't just pretend it didn't. I'm not pretending I shot back, more defensive than I intended. I just want to move on, okay? Move on, he let out a short, humorless laugh. From what, Alex? From what, Alex? From the fact that you ran out on me without a word? Or from the fact that it clearly meant something to you? His words hit me like a punch to the gut, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. He wasn't wrong. But admitting that, facing it, was terrifying. Carlos, I started, but the words stuck in my throat. He sighed, his frustration evident. Look, I'm not asking for anything. I just want us to be honest with each other. We have to work together, and it's going to be a hell of a lot harder if we keep avoiding this. I swallowed hard, knowing he was right, but still grappling with the fear of what it meant. I just don't know how to deal with this, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Carlos's expression softened, just a fraction. Neither do I. But maybe we can figure it out together. His words hung in the air, a lifeline I wasn't sure I was ready to grab. But there was no denying the truth. We couldn't keep ignoring what was between us. It wasn't just going to go away. I nodded slowly, the weight of the decision settling on my shoulders. Okay, let's talk. And just like that, the walls I'd tried so hard to build started to crumble, brick by brick. We agreed to meet after work, away from the office, away from prying eyes. The bar we chose was quiet, dimly lit, a world apart from the one where we first met. We sat in a booth near the back, drinks between us, but the tension still palpable. The air felt thick with everything left unsaid. Carlos was the first to speak, cutting through the silence with his usual directness. So where do we start? I took a slow sip of my drink, trying to buy time, but there was no escaping it. I guess we start with what happened in Barcelona. He nodded, leaning forward, his eyes locked on mine. It wasn't just a mistake, Alex. You know that as well as I do. My gut tightened at his words. I've spent the last 6 months convincing myself it was, I admitted, my voice strained. But then you walked into the office, and it all came rushing back. Carlos watched me carefully, as if weighing his next words. And what exactly came rushing back? Everything I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The way you made me feel, how I didn't know who I was anymore. It scared the hell out of me. His expression softened, a rare glimpse of vulnerability slipping through. You think I wasn't scared too, but running away didn't make it any easier. It just left us both hanging. I know, I said, guilt gnawing at me. I panicked. I wasn't ready to deal with whatever this is. Carlos sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. So what now? We're working together. We can't just keep pretending nothing happened. I nodded, understanding the weight of what he was saying. I don't want to pretend, Carlos, but I don't know how to handle this. Us. Carlos leaned back in his seat, eyes never leaving mine. Maybe we don't have to figure it all out right now. Maybe we just take it one step at a time. See where it goes. His calm, pragmatic approach was a stark contrast to the whirlwind of emotions inside me. It was like he was offering a lifeline, a way to navigate the storm without being completely swept away. You really think we can do that? I asked, doubt creeping into my voice. I think we have to, he replied, his tone firm but not unkind. For our sanity, if nothing else. I exhaled slowly, feeling some of the tension in my chest begin to ease. Okay, one step at a time. We lapsed into a more comfortable silence, the weight of the conversation hanging between us but no longer suffocating. I could see the determination in Carlos's eyes, the same determination that had drawn me to him in the first place. He wasn't going to let this slide, wasn't going to let me run away again. The bar started to fill up as the evening wore on, and the easy camaraderie we had in Barcelona began to slip back into place, albeit with the added tension of everything left unresolved. There was no denying the chemistry, the connection that had sparked between us. But now it was tinged with a sense of uncertainty, of walking on a tightrope where one wrong step could send us both tumbling. As we finished our drinks, Carlos leaned in slightly, his voice lower, more intimate. "So what's the next step, Alex?" I met his gaze, feeling that familiar pull, the same one that had drawn me to him in the first place. The next step. We don't avoid each other. We keep it professional at work, but we don't pretend we're just coworkers. He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I can work with that. We left the bar together, the night air cool against our skin, the city's hum a distant backdrop. As we walked, our shoulders occasionally brushed, a subtle reminder of everything still between us. I wasn't sure where this was heading, or if I was ready for it, but for the first time in months, I wasn't running. And that was a start. The following week was a whirlwind. Every day at work felt like walking a tightrope, balancing professionalism with the electric tension between Carlos and me. Meetings were longer, conversations lingered a bit too long, and every shared glance felt loaded with unspoken words. I could feel the weight building. Something was bound to give. One afternoon, we were deep into preparing a pitch for the Thompson account. The deadline was tight, and Claire was breathing down our necks for results. We were alone in the conference room, the rest of the team occupied elsewhere. "Alex, can you handle the market analysis section?" Carlos asked, his tone businesslike but his eyes betraying a hint of something else. "Sure. I've got it covered," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. As I turned to my laptop, I felt his gaze on me, intense and unwavering. The air seemed to thicken, the silence stretching uncomfortably. I dove into the data, my mind only half on the numbers. Every so often, Carlos would glance over my shoulder, his presence both comforting and unnerving. The minutes ticked by, each one dragging longer than the last. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I closed my laptop with a decisive snap, startling both of us. "Carlos, we need to talk." He looked up, surprise flickering across his face before settling into a guarded expression. "About what?" I took a deep breath, feeling the walls I'd built start to crumble. "About us. About what's been going on between us." Carlos leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I figured as much. You've been distracted since that night in Barcelona." I ran a hand through my hair, frustration bubbling to the surface. "It's not just that. I've been trying to move on, focus on work, but it's harder than I thought." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I've been struggling too, Alex. I didn't expect to see you again, not like this. It threw me off balance." Before I could respond, the door swung open and Claire walked in, her eyes darting between us. "Everything okay in here?" I exchanged a quick glance with Carlos, who gave me a subtle nod. "All good, Claire. Just wrapping up the market analysis." She smiled, oblivious to the tension. "Great. Let me know if you need anything." As she left, Carlos turned back to me, his expression serious. "Look, Alex, I don't want this to ruin our work, but I can't ignore how I feel either." My heart pounded in my chest. "Neither can I. But what are we supposed to do? We're colleagues, and I'm not sure where this is going." He took a step closer, his eyes searching mine. "Maybe we don't have to figure it all out right now. Maybe we just need to be honest about what we want." Before I could answer, the phone on the table rang, slicing through the moment like a knife. Claire's voice floated in from the doorway. "Alex, we have a problem with the Thompson account. The client just called. There's a major issue with the campaign rollout. We need you and Carlos to handle it immediately." I glanced at Carlos, whose jaw tightened. "Looks like our conversation will have to wait." He nodded reluctantly. "Yeah, let's go." As we hurried out of the conference room, the urgency of the situation pulled us back into the professional realm, leaving the personal tension unresolved. The client's problem was critical. If we didn't fix it, our firm could lose a key account. We plunged into the crisis, our earlier conversation lingering in the back of my mind. Hours later, after a sleepless night of strategizing and troubleshooting, we finally resolved the issue. Exhausted, we leaned against each other for support, the adrenaline still coursing through our veins. "Good job," Carlos said quietly, his eyes meeting mine. "Yeah, we did it," I replied, feeling a surge of relief mixed with something deeper. As we packed up to leave, Carlos paused, looking hesitant. "Alex, about earlier, I'm sorry if I pushed too hard." I shook my head, a small smile tugging at my lips. No, I needed to hear it. Maybe we can take it from here. He reached out, his hand brushing mine in a fleeting touch that sent a shiver down my spine. One step at a time, he echoed, the promise clear in his eyes. We walked out of the office together, the night air cool and calming after the intense day. But as we reached the parking lot, a black car pulled up beside us, windows tinted. The driver rolled down the window, revealing a familiar face, Emily. "Alex," she called out, stepping out of the car with a determined look. "We need to talk." Carlos tensed beside me, and I felt my heart race again. What was Emily doing here? And what did this mean for everything between Carlos and me? The unexpected appearance of Emily left me with more questions than answers, the tension between all three of us thickening the air. As Emily approached, the night suddenly felt far from over, and I realized that the fresh start I'd worked so hard to achieve was about to get a lot more complicated. Emily's sudden reappearance felt like a punch to the gut. My past and present collided, and for a moment I was paralyzed, caught between two worlds. Carlos stood beside me, his tension palpable, while Emily's determined gaze was locked on mine. I braced myself, unsure of what she was about to say. "Alex," she began, her voice steady but tinged with something I couldn't quite place, "we need to talk. It's important." Carlos shifted slightly, as if ready to step back and give us space, but I grabbed his arm, holding him in place. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. Emily glanced at Carlos, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before she nodded. "All right, I came to apologize for everything that happened between us, for how things ended. I was hurt, and I know you were too, but I never wanted it to end the way it did." Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret. I felt a pang of guilt for how things had ended between us, and guilt for moving on without really dealing with the fallout. But at the same time, I realized that I had already started to let go of the past, that my feelings for Emily had dulled, replaced by something new, something I was only beginning to understand. "Emily, I appreciate that," I said, my voice softer now, "but we both know that we weren't right for each other. It took me a while to see that, but I have now." She nodded, her eyes sad but resigned. "I know. I just wanted to say my piece, to let you know there are no hard feelings." "Thank you," I replied, meaning it. It felt like a weight had lifted, like this was the closure I hadn't realized I needed. "I wish you all the best." Emily offered a small, wistful smile before turning her gaze to Carlos. "And you take care of him, okay?" Carlos, who had been silently watching the exchange, nodded. "I will." With that, Emily gave me one last look, then turned and got back into her car, driving off into the night. I stood there for a moment, watching the taillights fade, feeling a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, but mostly a sense of finality. The chapter with Emily was truly closed. Carlos's hand on my shoulder brought me back to the present. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, exhaling deeply. "I think I am." He didn't say anything, just stood there with me, his presence grounding me in the moment. After everything that had happened, after all the running and hiding, I felt a clarity I hadn't felt in months. "Carlos," I began, turning to face him fully, "I don't want to keep running from this. From us." His eyes searched mine, and I could see the hope there, cautious but real. "Are you sure? We don't have to rush into anything." "I'm sure," I said, surprising myself with how certain I was. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I'm ready to stop pretending. I don't know what this is between us, but I want to find out." A slow smile spread across Carlos's face, the tension in his shoulders easing. "I've been waiting to hear that." I chuckled. The sound light, almost foreign after everything. "Yeah, I figured." He reached out, his hand finding mine, the touch familiar and comforting. "So, where do we go from here?" "Anywhere we want," I replied, and for the first time in a long time I felt a genuine excitement about the future, about the possibilities that lay ahead. We walked back to the car together, the night suddenly full of promise. The tension that had once weighed so heavily between us was replaced by something else: hope, anticipation, and the thrill of the unknown. As we drove through the city, the lights of the streets blurring past us. I realized that this was the start of something new, something I wasn't going to run from. Emily's return had been the final push I needed to close the door on my past and open myself up to whatever came next with Carlos. I glanced over at him, his profile lit by the glow of the dashboard, and felt a warmth spread through me. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever difficulties we would face, I knew we'd face them together. And for the first time in a long time, that thought didn't scare me, it exhilarated me. The city was wide open before us, and so was the future. All we had to do was take the next step. The days following my conversation with Emily felt different, lighter. There was no more running, no more hiding. I had made a decision, and for once I wasn't second-guessing myself. Carlos and I continued working together, but something had shifted. The tension that had once hung between us like a dark cloud had lifted, replaced by a sense of ease and understanding. One evening, the week after Emily's visit, Carlos invited me to his place for dinner. It wasn't unusual, we'd been spending more time together outside of work, but tonight felt significant. There was an unspoken understanding that this was more than just another meal, it was the beginning of whatever was next for us. Carlos's apartment was warm, inviting, with the faint scent of something delicious cooking in the kitchen. As I walked in, I noticed the small touches that made the space distinctly his, the books stacked neatly on the shelves, the carefully chosen art on the walls, the guitar leaning in the corner. "Smells good," I said, shrugging off my jacket and hanging it by the door. Carlos looked up from the stove, a smile spreading across his face. "Glad you think so. It's nothing fancy, just pasta." I walked over to where he stood, the ease between us feeling as natural as breathing. Pasta sounds perfect. We ate at the small table by the window, the city lights twinkling outside. The conversation flowed easily, a mix of work talk, personal stories, and the kind of banter that had become second nature between us. The food was good, but it was the company that made the evening feel special. After dinner, we moved to the couch, a glass of wine in each hand. The silence between us was comfortable, the kind that didn't need to be filled with words. I could feel Carlos watching me, his gaze warm and steady, and when I met his eyes, the electricity that had always been there sparked to life. "This feels right," I said, breaking the silence, my voice soft but sure. Carlos nodded, reaching out to take my hand. "It does." We sat like that for a while, hands intertwined, the world outside falling away. I thought back to the night in Barcelona, how different everything had been, then how lost and confused I'd felt. Now, sitting here with Carlos, I realized just how far I'd come, how far we both had. "Carlos," I began, squeezing his hand gently, "I know I've been all over the place, and I don't have all the answers yet, but I do know that I want to be with you. I'm not running anymore." His eyes softened, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "You don't have to have all the answers, Alex. We'll figure it out together. One step at a time, remember." I smiled, the weight of those words settling into my chest like a promise. One step at a time. Carlos leaned in, closing the space between us, and when our lips met, it was different from the first time. There was no urgency, no confusion, just a deep, quiet certainty that this was where I was meant to be. The kiss deepened, slow and unhurried, as if we had all the time in the world. When we finally pulled back, I rested my forehead against his, both of us breathing in the moment. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It is," Carlos replied, his tone full of warmth and promise. "The start of something good." We spent the rest of the night together, wrapped up in each other, talking about everything and nothing. The city buzzed outside, but inside it was just the two of us, creating a new chapter together, one that was ours to write. As the night drew to a close and the first light of dawn peeked through the window, I felt a deep sense of peace. There were still challenges ahead, still questions I'd have to face, but I knew I wasn't facing them alone. Carlos stirred beside me, his arm draped over my chest as we lay on the couch, half asleep but content. I glanced down at him, feeling a warmth spread through me that I hadn't felt in a long time. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "Morning," I replied, a smile tugging at my lips. He shifted, pulling me closer, and in that moment everything felt right. The city outside was waking up, the day beginning anew, and so was I, so were we. This was the start of something real, something I was ready to embrace fully. The past was behind us, and the future stretched out ahead, full of possibilities. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what was to come. I was ready to face it head on, with Carlos by my side. One step at a time, together.